and friends. Welcome back to the Church Bird Podcast. This is Pastor Nick, pastor of the First Baptist Church of Palos Verdes, where we worship every Sunday at 11 a.m. at 28 Moccasin Lane, Rolling Hills Estates, California, in the greater Los Angeles, i.e. South Bay area. And I'm glad to have you here, where here on the Church Bird Podcast, we talk about post-sermon, post-church, and post-cultural reflections on the issues of our day, specifically things you can't talk about during the actual sermon. So this Sunday, I was pleased to go through Revelation chapter 21 and the rest of the chapter, which essentially looks at the coming of God's sanctuary, the new holy city, the heavenly Jerusalem, all of that coming down from heaven. And I was just struck by how John, in his vision, manages to take all these Old Testament prophetic texts and creation texts and light texts and all these sorts of images and put them together in this really beautiful constellation of images. And how John will essentially showcase that as the prophets say, and as the Old Testament says, the whole earth is full of God's glory. And it's kind of this beautiful image where John essentially argues that God's presence has purified all things, as we see in Isaiah, whereas as Isaiah is kind of ushered into the throne room and is purified, is made clean and is thus sent forward. How God makes light and gives light and life to all of creation, that all of God's presence, in essence, boils down to God making himself at home in his world. In a world without sin or suffering or death or pain, God's presence is essentially unfiltered. And you have, of course, the imagery of the measuring of the temple and all these sorts of measurements and kind of dimensions of it. And kind of, you might think of the building or the construction of the tabernacle in the Old Testament. But John basically seems to be arguing that imagery, that sort of Jewish lens or foundation, is a foretaste of what God will do everywhere. And what was maybe perhaps limited in that sense, although I don't think God was limited. I think the whole point was to get people to come. I think God basically articulates this beautiful vision where the hope of the Old Testament and the prophetic tradition finds its full fulfillment in the book of Revelation, at the end of all things sinful and evil, and in the inauguration of God's heavenly realm. And so I was just struck by how much time and detail John just has for these different stones and dimensions and gold and clear and crystal and all these sorts of things. And it's so easy to get kind of caught in the splendor of the moment when you realize that this whole thing, there's no sun anymore. There's no moon. God's presence is kind of the eternal now, that God's entire working of all things is sort of inaugurated for us, that whatever may have been shrouded in the temple, and I don't think it was ever shrouded at all, is essentially laid entirely open, that there's nothing unclean anymore, there's nothing impure anymore, there's nothing sinful anymore. All things that have accepted Christ as in faith, have washed themselves in the free gift and drinking from the great gift that God gives to us. All of these things essentially purify us through God's kind of just generosity and his gift and his love and his care for us. And I have a friend who says the Torah, the Old Testament, the 5 books of Moses, or what we call the law, is God's essential love letter to us. And here that love letter is no longer just a letter, it is embodied for us, that God's presence is now present with us in all things in every place. And that sort of vision that John gets as he's kind of coming out of this apocalyptic visionary experience, he gets kind of a taste through the fog of reality when he kind of sees both his incarcerated state, but also sees exactly where all things are going, that God's mission to reconcile the world and to destroy sin, evil, and death, and Satan is coming to fruition. And John's vision at the end of it is essentially articulating what Jesus said, "Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven." And if anything is true about what the Bible says, and all of it's true, it is that God is at work and that his space will become sacred as he is sacred. And that is why, as Christians, our job is very, very simple: to love him and to bring heaven on earth, and to give that heaven to everyone, so that they all might taste, know, and believe that Jesus Christ is he, the Son of the living God, the Lamb of the world, whose blood cleanses us from every sin. And I think at the end of it, that is our mission. God's will be done. He will bring all things under his feet. He'll close up all of human history. He'll reconcile. But in the meantime, in the interim, we wait in longing to do the things that God has given to us. And we live in that state of incarceration, of darkness and pain. But we also know, having tasted it, that Jesus Christ will bring his kingdom to bear, and the fruits of this will have no end.